Hello, everyone. This is Shauna Young. I'm so excited to be here with you this evening in our panel discussion. We gave you a few more minutes. We know some people are still coming online, but we're really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. As many of you know, I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Engineering Outreach Programs, and today we're going to be talking about pursuing careers in STEM fields, and I'm just extremely delighted to have Dr. Yvonne Spicer facilitate this conversation with us. She's also one of our advisory board members, and we'll talk a little bit more about her. I think we have a presentation coming up for you to see, so hopefully you can see that now. Hold on, actually, I can. Let's see. I can share my screen. Oh, it's up now. Awesome. Okay. And so, as you know, I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Engineering Outreach Programs. We will, today, after introductions, I'll give you a quick overview of the OEOP and then really pass it over to Linda, our consultant for student support, who will introduce Yvonne Spicer. And Yvonne will have most of the time to talk with you, present information to you, and also answer questions that you may have about how do you help your student, your child, pursue a career in STEM. I think this is a very important topic, I know, for myself as two parents who were awesome, but neither of them really pursued a career in STEM. My dad was an Air Force mechanic, and my mom was a business teacher. And so the way in which I figured out how do I learn about chemistry, how do I get a degree in chemistry, and how do I become a science teacher was sort of my own path. And so we're hoping that we'll give you really important information to help you ask questions, guide, and maybe even find mentors for your children if you don't have the information yourself. And so I want to start by giving you an overview of what the OEOP is. As you all know, as an office, we're focused on providing access to students in STEM fields, and so especially students who typically would not have access to it. So from communities where maybe you would not know that you can go to a top school like MIT and pursue science and engineering. So we want to make STEM accessible to all students, and we're focusing on serving students who may not have the same opportunities as those who might come from communities or backgrounds where they have more available resources. When we think about our organization, when I think about our organization, the values that we have, there are a couple that really stand out. And one is transformation. When our students finish our programs, they feel very differently about the confidence they have, the skills they have, and the ability to pursue careers in science and engineering. And so, and there's open access. So there's no cost to participate in our programs. We bring together a community of learners, of thinkers, of teachers to help our students and our alumni thrive in this pursuit of STEM careers. The programs that we offer, many of you represent them. The MICE program has been around for going into 42 years now. It provides students with 6 weeks of classes in science, engineering, and technology. The E2 program is a 1-week program that is offered for students going into the 12th grade also from around the country. They take one engineering course in the afternoon and have labs and tours around MIT and seminar speeches throughout the week. And then Most Tech is a 6-month online program where students get a chance to take classes online, come to campus for 5 days, and meet their instructors and fellow classmates on campus, and then also take workshops in other fields of engineering and science. Seed Academy is a 3.5-year Saturday enrichment program which empowers students to really learn different fields of engineering and science, and that's for local high school students, so Boston area high school students interested in science and engineering. And then the STEM program is a middle school program that provides these talented middle school students with high school content in STEM fields. So those are our programs. I'll now turn it over to Linda, who will introduce Yvonne, and also tell you a little bit about the purpose of this series, and we'll go from there. So, 1 second.
I will be right with you. Hi. Nice to see everyone again. Thank you so much for joining us for our ongoing series for parents and students. I'm so excited tonight to be having the opportunity to have Dr. Spicer here with us. She, as you know from her bio that we've sent you, is the VP of Advocacy and Educational Partnerships at the National Center for Technological Literacy at the Boston Museum of Science. She's also an OEOP advisory board member and has been for many years. She's here tonight to talk with you about STEM education and career awareness, the educational paths leading to STEM careers. She's going to be discussing current challenges as well as opportunities available in STEM fields, and she's going to talk a little bit about her own journey. I'm sure you'll be as inspired by Dr. Spicer as we are here at OEOP, and we welcome you again to our webinar with Dr. Spicer. Let's get your slides up.
You can see it.
Good evening. Good evening. And in this short time that I have, I want to be able to, first of all, give you a context of looking at ways in which
Nope, we're still fine. Okay. I'm just pulling up your PowerPoint.
So in looking at ways in which STEM fields have made a difference, can make a difference in students' lives, and also for those of you that might be parents with students and trying to figure out what should you be paying attention to. So I'm going to try to cover a lot in a little bit of time, but I also felt that it would be really terrific to have this dialogue, and also I bring a lot of personal contributions to this topic because as Linda introduced me, my journey has been very interesting in STEM, and I'll share a little bit more about that. But first of all, you know, the reason I do the work I love to do, which is inspiring and also advocating for STEM education, is because it's important for me to inspire children to, in the next generation, to say, are they making progress? And are all children making progress? Because eventually we all want our children to have a career where they actually can graduate high school, graduate college, or whatever career choice they choose, whether to go right into the workforce. But clearly we want them all gainfully employed, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about some ideas around STEM and the workforce as well. So just briefly, here's a few of the major milestones in STEM education over the last 15 years. And part of these initiatives around STEM really is trying to look and say, why? Why is all of the emphasis on STEM education? And it started back, as you can see, 2001, when Massachusetts became the first state in the nation to have standards and assessments for engineering. And now, if you look at what has happened in 2013, the Next Generation Science Standards, which is the first attempt across this country to have what I liken to a collaborative way of thinking about science and engineering, where 26 states participated in the creation of these standards. So this was huge because, as you know, in this country, we have 50 states and many of them are very autonomous, and so they create their own standards. So all of these initiatives were designed to really look at what has been happening in science, in technology, in engineering in and around across this country. So part of that is my role and my work has been looking at both standards, policies, practices, and I've had a role to play in all of these initiatives. So I come back to say, why is this so important? And I like graphics. And this graphic of a leaky pipeline, and it's the STEM pipeline. So if you kind of look at the graphic, and it starts where approximately 4 million ninth graders start in ninth grade. By the time you get to graduation 4 years later, that number is down to 2.8 million high school graduates. Of those high school graduates, only 1.9 million of them have college plans. Then that pipeline gets even smaller, and of those that have college plans, only 1.3 are really college ready. And then you start to look and see who is actually majoring in a STEM field, and that's about 278,000. And those that end up with a STEM STEM degree in 4 years, that's about 167,000. So if you look, we started at 4 million students, and look at the pipeline. So it's leaking at every place, and I will submit to you that it doesn't start at ninth grade. It actually starts much earlier. And we'll look at some more slides to talk a little bit more about that. This is an issue that is not just germane to the United States. It is a global issue. It's one that we need to look at across the world, and I've actually had an opportunity to work across the world in other countries to look at, they're looking at the exact same things we are. You know, how do we get our kids more engaged? How can we find opportunities for them that will eventually lead them to successful careers in STEM? So I like to always look at the data across the board, and part of that is looking, what are we doing as a nation, how are we doing as a state, and then to look more locally, what's happening in your local school communities. So let's look at it from a international perspective. In this particular administration of the PISA assessment, Massachusetts was treated as if it was its own country, and I sometimes think we do feel we're our own little country. But as you can see, Massachusetts did exceptionally well on PISA in both grades 4 science and also grade 8 science. And in this particular administration, it was Massachusetts and Minnesota that was treated as if they were countries. But as you look in the red line, United States as a whole, not doing so, probably middle of the pack in 4th grade, and as you can see, it gets the situation gets a little more desperate as they get to the 8th grade. We look at mathematics. We're ranked 24 out of 29 OECD countries, and which, at first I thought this data, I said this was in 2003, but as you can see from the next slide, we've actually gotten even worse by 2012 PISA data, where we were over 500 and with a median score, where now, if you look towards the left where it's bolded, United States is like 481. So we've actually slipped a little bit further down the notch in mathematics. And when I start to look at the NAEP assessment, which is the National Assessment for Mathematics and Reading, at the administration, we actually had increased a little bit over 2005, but since 2009, we pretty much remained unchanged. And if you start to look at reading, we actually decreased a little bit in 1992, but as you look since 2009, it's unchanged. So we haven't had a lot of leverage in math or reading since 2009. We've been pretty even-keeled. So as I love to look at a national picture, because I know some of you may be dialing in from other parts of the country and trying to look at where do we stand in different states. And if you look at the chart, and I'm going to go through a couple of them, the darker the color, the better position your state is in terms of assessment. And as you can see, some of the states are in white. These are states that did not report any data whatsoever. So take a look at the map, find your state, and look at 4th grade math, and then look at 4th grade science, then 4th grade math, 8th grade math, and then 8th grade science. So in some states, like Massachusetts, if you look at the picture, it's pretty much in the dark blue. It's showing that Massachusetts is doing pretty well. But I caution you to not read too much into the data, because I will submit there are many hamlets of Massachusetts that are not doing so well. And it's important to really dig deep locally what's happening in the local community. And so what I encourage you is, what courses are being offered at your child's school, especially in high school. And this chart is actually disaggregating the data not only by race, but is also looking at gender as well as the courses that are offered. So if we look at mathematics, the vast majority of high schools will offer Algebra 2. However, when you start to get to calculus, there are fewer and fewer children that are taking calculus. And as we know, calculus is a gatekeeper for a lot of STEM professions. So it's really important to see, are these courses being offered? I can tell you an interesting story. Several years ago when I had a position at the Department of Education and was really doing an analysis here in Massachusetts of what were the actual graduation requirements for various schools. And what I had discovered was that there was a good number of schools that only required 2 years of mathematics for students. And since, I mean, I know for a fact that a number of them have increased it to 3, and I'm sure our math professionals would recommend that all students have 4 years of mathematics. So as you can see, the numbers are different in terms of where kids are taking courses, particularly in calculus, but also demographically. If you look at children of color, Hispanic and African American students are fewer, probably the smallest group, and Native American that are taking calculus in schools. So let's look at science. Same thing with science. For the most part, most kids are getting biology. Most kids, a good number are getting chemistry. But if you look at physics, even fewer kids are receiving physics in school or taking physics courses. Once again, another gatekeeper for STEM courses in college to be able to be college ready and prepared. So as you can see, once again, Hispanic and African American students are fewer in that number, you know, a little bit better than the calculus number, but still much smaller number. And so these are some real strong factors that really influence how do kids prepare for a STEM career. And Bill Swanson, former Raytheon CEO, kind of agrees with me that, you know, we're preparing too many students and adults training for jobs in which labor is a surplus, and whereas the demand for high demand jobs like in STEM, they go unfulfilled because we do not have people in the pipeline. So that's a critical component of, you know, why it is important for kids to study STEM. You know, you start to look at the intellectual capital drain that happens over with advanced degrees, and most of our advanced degrees are going to people that are not native to the United States. So they're leaving, they're coming to get their degrees in this country, but they're also leaving with that knowledge. So it's an intellectual drain, and probably the 3 top countries, China, India, and South Korea, are kind of moving out of most of the citizens that are getting those degrees, and that's been problematic. So maintaining our own intellectual capital in this country has been a problem. So if we start to think about who's majoring in what and when they go to college, and when we start to think about by gender, and I'm looking at this by gender, overwhelmingly in education, females are overwhelmingly in education, whereas conversely, engineering, overwhelmingly male. Now, it's gotten a little bit better for females, but still the vast majority are males and females that are distributed. And sometimes I liken this situation is that, you know, when you start to go and say, okay, where are those women that are taking STEM fields? And what are they doing? And as you drill down, the vast majority of those that are in STEM field, women, they're in more of the social sciences like psychologists. And then conversely, look at mechanical engineering, whereas it only roughly about 5%. So it really is a very telling picture in terms of your high-tech types of jobs in mechanical engineering, engineering management, as opposed to more of the social sciences. And then when you start to look at workforce, you know, overwhelmingly the chart on the left kind of gives you a big picture of, okay, who's in the workforce and by demographics. And then the other chart on the right side looks at the workforce by STEM occupation and by race. So, for example, let's take Asian, look at Asian population, represents about 4.4% of the population in the United States workforce. However, they represent about 16.4 of those involved in STEM. So they're almost four times as many people that are Asian that are involved in STEM. And conversely, looking at Black and African American, which represent about 12.5% of the population, but roughly only 4% of those involved in STEM fields. So you already, even if you had a 1-to-1 ratio, we're still at a severe deficit too, in which the overrepresentation in STEM tends to be white, 67% of the population, but 74.5% of those involved in STEM, and often white males. So that is where we have this issue with having a very narrow pipeline in STEM. And as we get to start to look at some real data about those that are leaving the workforce, the baby boomers, 76% baby boomers will retire, but there's only 51 million there to replace them. So we're at a 25 million person gap already because we don't have those people in the pipeline. And I think one of the other startling statistics on this chart that is really looking at the functional illiteracy rate in this country. And how this is severely impacting who is actually going to be able to get into STEM fields. And finally, I would like to look at, the realities are there. STEM jobs have grown by 17% compared to 9.8% for other occupations. So almost a 2-to-1 ratio. And for every 3.6 people for every one job, and when you start to look at STEM, jobs in STEM, for every one person, there's 1.9 jobs. So in essence, there's a 1-to-2 ratio for jobs. And it's very clear that this is a career worth being in as we start to look at this chart. Even from the level of an associate's degree, you're going to make about 66% more money than someone that doesn't have a STEM degree. And of course, that gets a little bit better for you as you go up the chart. And with the median salary for engineering majors is $91,000 a year. So, what's the problem? This is one of the issues. Is kids see being in STEM as nerdy, have to be a math and science geek, you must be extremely bright, you're a poor communicator. These are all of the negative stereotypes around STEM professions. And I have to say, it's hard work trying to convince kids that it's creative. You enjoy working with people. You enjoy solving problems. And part of that is also being an example. When kids see me and they say, are you really involved in STEM fields? Absolutely. So it's really a lot of PR work that we have to do. And oftentimes I take something very simple like their cell phones. I ask the kids, how many of you have cell phones? What do you do with them? How many of you know how they work? And oftentimes kids are not able to tell me how they work. They are able to tell me how to use their cell phone and all the functionality of them, but not how they are made. So, that's the entree of really saying, if you want to learn how these are made, this is a job, this is a profession. So those are the places that we have to start with kids very early on putting things in front of them and showing them the connection between why they learn math and science and what does it apply to. Because I genuinely believe we can do better, and we can do better to raise the bar for all of our children. I certainly think that it's challenging, but one of the things that is great is that you've got great people who believe in this mission as well. And if some of you might be familiar with Bill Nye, the science guy who's on the left, and of course our President Obama is in the middle, and Neil deGrasse Tyson on the end. And all of these gentlemen are very engaged in STEM education too. The White House having competitions, the U.S. STEM Festival, which will happen in about another week. Bill Nye is constantly doing engaging work to show how fun science can be and how it is applied. And so those are the kinds of places, and these are the real people that we have to start to engage our kids with. Clearly one of the things that I have done is really looking at those federal partnerships, and I had an opportunity to meet the U.S. Secretary of Education and really look at policy that affects STEM education. And a few years ago, they had a Race to the Top program which looked at funding for states. And if you look at that application, the only priority was STEM education, and that was something we had a role to play in that and moving that agenda forward at the U.S. Department of Education. So I was pretty happy about that. You know, what I thought was going to be about a 10-minute meeting with Arnie Dunkett wound up being about a 45-minute meeting where he was very curious about why this was so important. So that was something really great to happen. And also, our own Congressman Joe Kennedy is very engaged and involved in this process. Joe also sits as the honorary chair of the State of Massachusetts STEM Council, but he is also on the Science and Technology Committee at the in U.S. Congress, where he actually advises on engineering and STEM policy. The other interesting thing about Joe, he's an engineer by trade, and so he gets it, and he's always not only fighting for Massachusetts, but around the country. And our former Governor Patrick, he certainly was a real driving force behind having a STEM council and making Massachusetts the first state in the nation to maintain their STEM council, but also be an integral part of the learning within the state of Massachusetts. So that was a real revolutionary thing that happened, that since other states have chimed in and actually adopted some of the same policies, and that's exciting to be a part of that. And of course, I had an opportunity to work very closely with astronaut Mae Jemison, who really gets what we're doing, is very pleased. And she's like me, that certainly we didn't have a whole lot of role models growing up that was doing something related to STEM education. So that's been a very positive and powerful movement. And that kind of brings it full circle, because once you lay the foundation around why STEM education, what is it about, how do we need to look at what's going on in the curriculum in schools, it's important to come back and say, how does this make a difference, and who does it make a difference for? And I couldn't do this presentation without kind of reflecting on, why do I do this? Why is it important to me? And where do I get my inspiration? And, you know, and a large part of my inspiration comes from my great-grandmother. Her name was Annie Brockington. And sometimes I look at the women in my family, and I realize that these women did not have the same opportunities as I did, nor did they have any idea about the work that I'm doing around STEM. And so, you know, it wasn't that I had a route to STEM that was very linear. And part of that was really kind of acknowledging my history and my family history. And my great-grandmother, Annie Brockington, is the daughter of freed slaves. Annie Brockington, this is my great-grandmother Annie celebrating her 100th birthday in 1964. That is my cousin helping her blow out the candles, my older cousin. So, yeah, and they did a news article about her and her celebration of her 100th birthday. So when I think about Annie Brockington, I think about all that she could not experience or could not even conceive that her great-granddaughter would do today. And that's kind of exciting to me. And it also is an inspiration for me to continue to pass that torch and pass the baton to other young women as well. So when I start to think about careers in STEM, and I actually made a list of all of the jobs that I have had over my professional career. And each one of them has a correlation to STEM education. Yeah, and at the time, I never thought about it, but there is a correlation to STEM, because in each one of these jobs, I had to apply my knowledge of math, I had to apply my knowledge of science, I had to apply problem solving, I had to also apply solutions to a problem, which is part of the engineering design process, but also content knowledge and how to synthesize a situation and come up with an effective solution to each one of these situations. You know, and I sometimes tell students that the reality is it may not sound like you're on a path to something, but you really are. And I'll give you a perfect example. one of my jobs, I worked at Bloomingdale's in the flagship store at 1000 3rd Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, which was a fabulous job. I happened to work in a department that I didn't think would be all of that interesting, and certainly not, technically related. But it was something that I learned as a result of this working in this department of customer relations, how to negotiate situations. And I actually worked in the fine lingerie department. Now, you would never think about how the construction of clothing and how serious of a profession this is, where, fashion lines and opportunities to be in customer service, sales and finance part of that was also, I received commissions on sales. So really looking at inventory, understanding, how to move certain products along the way. All of that really kind of tied in to a lot of what I do today, which is a lot of outreach work. So, each and every one of these jobs has certainly propelled me in a way that I never thought possible, but it's been a very, very interesting journey. And when I start to think about all of the things that I've been able to do, to work internationally, to be on television, to go to Ireland and work with the government there, to work at the National Governors Association. So there's been a lot of opportunities for me to expand on STEM education. And when I come back and I said, what was that made a difference for me? What made a difference for me was opportunity. What made a difference for me was the belief in myself that I could do this, and also realizing that it was interesting. And so that's one of the things that has been really, really fascinating as I've gone on in life. So I come back and think about the toolkit for parents and students. And I think when parents are armed with good information, resources, an opportunity to question what's being taught, that is what we do in my place of work, which is the National Center for Technological Literacy, and we are headquartered at the Museum of Science. So when you start to think about why on earth would the Museum of Science move into a direction of caring about STEM education and ways in which to get involved in STEM education, and at the end of the day, what we had a thought, and this thought came from our president primarily, is that if we are not building our own pipeline of STEM proficient students, then we are not doing our work as a museum. We're not doing our work as learned educators in this work. So this was the impetus of starting the center, which was a huge leap of faith for the Museum of Science. Most people, when they think of the Museum of Science, they think we come in, we have exhibits, you come and enjoy the exhibit, you leave at 5 o'clock. And the whole notion of getting involved in education is something very, very new. And 10 years ago, this vision was had by our president and brought me on board to help realize that. So that's been a real pivotal part of this initiative. We know a lot. In my background in education, and particularly STEM education, really helped out in a way that I could help formulate and also look at ways in which instruction happens in the classroom and so forth. So as a part of the center, what we do is we develop curriculum, we work with teachers, we offer professional development, because at the end of the day, we feel that if teachers are comfortable starting all the way from the elementary level, if teachers are comfortable with this, I honestly believe that it will happen in a much more cohesive manner in public schools, and we have seen the evidence of our work over the last couple of years. But we offer elementary, middle, and high school curriculum, as well as a leadership program that helps school districts build capacity, and that's a program that I actually teach. Where we're looking at ways in which school districts are thinking about this systemically across the board. So this, parents, this is some of the things that you're needing to think about. What is available for your children in their K through 12 school experience? And making sure that that's happening quite consistently. And granted, even though I strongly believe we're onto the right road, doing these things, there's still much more work to be done as it starts to look at the career, because the first and foremost is having the foundation, being prepared in terms of accessing STEM opportunities, because if students are not prepared for college work, it's very difficult for them to actually move quickly into STEM fields. So my hope is that we're doing a much better job in the K-12 arena so they are prepared and more students are able to pursue STEM fields that may or may not have a long-term career as a scientist or an engineer, but they're STEM literate. They will have the knowledge to be able to pursue careers if they so choose. So I do believe that there are a lot of bridges to still cross, and part of that is getting over that first hurdle, and that first hurdle is being prepared. It really is being academically prepared. The next hurdle is really having opportunity, and I was having a really interesting conversation around the notion of making sure kids are having experiences before going to college, so they have a very good idea of what it is they'd like to study in college. Because I think there are a lot of students that are off to college that really don't have a clear-cut idea. What is engineering? What does it mean to be involved in technology? What are those different pathways that they can pursue? That's something that I think should happen on a regular basis in high schools and middle schools, where kids have an opportunity to visit workplace. They have an opportunity to have speakers come in where they're actually seeing what a career looks like in these professions. So as I start to think about our impact, I mean, we certainly have done a lot. We've gone across the country with probably about 9 million students we have worked with. And in particular, we are starting to track some of the data to look at how have our students done on assessment in terms of their science content, looking at ways in which teachers have efficacy about teaching culturally relevant facts and curriculum when they have the tools to be successful. How does it impact their teaching and learning in the classroom? So those are some of the places we're doing some research right now, and also trying to very hard to think about this with our partners, because once again, even though I've addressed a lot of things that happen in education, this is not just the problem of education. This is a global problem. We need the engagement of business and industry. They have to be involved. Post-secondary needs to be involved, because we have to start examining how we instruct classroom, what are our classroom practices that inhibit more students being able to pursue STEM fields. So that's kind of the direction we're kind of heading in. And as I said, we have been working in all 50 states for over the last 7 or 8 years, which has been terrific. But we are also starting to move across the country. And I think I want to leave a few minutes for some questions. And I just think I'll end with the notion that it's so important that we teach our children that they can do anything. And one of the important things is realizing that this is their life, their future. We're helping our children prepare for the life that they will live, not the life we have lived already. So it's important they have to answer this call for their dreams. And if their dream is to be engaged in a profession that is going to have a good livelihood, STEM education is one of those career pathways. So I thank you for listening to me for the last few minutes, but I want to also leave a little bit of time. As I can see, we've got about 15 minutes, and leave a little bit of time for some questions. And you can certainly reach me on Twitter, or you can email me, or visit our website. And at this point, I'll stop and open up for some questions. Thank you.
So we have one question already, which is, can you talk a little bit more about how to find internships and networking opportunities in STEM fields? Oh, that's excellent. That's an excellent question. And I think the internships should start early. And I think the best thing to do is to start asking. I know at the Museum of Science, and most people don't realize this, that we offer several internships. We have a full-time internship coordinator.
So we have, usually on average in the summer months, we have close to 150 to 200 interns in that building. And there are many opportunities, whether you're working in our marketing department, our finance department, or working in our with our small animals. We are the only museum with a certified zoo. So we do have a cadre of small animals housed at the Museum of Science. Get on websites, do Google searches for internships, ask questions too, find companies, and actually start to send them a letter. Would you hire an intern? Are you interested in hiring? And I think some of the things that I often tell young folks is to be proactive. Be as knowledgeable as you possibly can, but be proactive. And also know that sometimes it's not exactly your career pathway that you're thinking of, but it's something tangential. Like every year I host several interns, and I had an intern that was a environmental science major, but wanted to learn more about education and environmental science. So right now, she is pursuing a master's degree in education with an emphasis in environmental science. So having that internship to look at some of the work I do with education inspired her to actually pursue more in education. So that's why I always say, try to expand your horizons in a bit, because you never know. Something else may interest you, and you might find that niche where you can actually marry many of your loves. So.
Great. Also, everyone, the Q&A box on the WebEx, feel free to write any questions in. We're going to answer you, but if you want to type in more, don't be shy. One other question we have is, are you at a disadvantage if you don't seek further education after college, and do you need to have a grad degree to be successful in STEM?
Oh, very good question. I would say it's important to get additional training, because the reality is your knowledge base is limited with, you say, for example, just a high school diploma. If you went on to a certificate program, or actually expand your horizons, once again, I'm a staunch believer that the more you know in different arenas, the better it is for you in order to marry multiple things. And it also doesn't have to be a graduate degree. It could be in experience. It could be a certificate. So it is certainly not a precursor. And it all depends on what it is you want to do. I'll give you a perfect example. If you have the goal of ever teaching university, say you want to teach in a university, a doctoral degree will become very important. And certainly a master's degree, but certain professions it's not necessarily a requirement. So it's very good to learn what you want to do and the requirements for some of these professions, but also don't become so fixated on those requirements that you miss opportunities to expand your intellectual horizon.
Meredith, are there other questions?
I don't see any.
This is called wait time, because sometimes people are processing questions. I'll throw out something also that I may not have talked much about. It's important to look at why you want to do something. And sometimes, often people say, well, okay, the number one factor why I would want to pursue a STEM career would be financial. And I would say that would be the wrong reason. I would say to think about it from a lens of, if you woke up every morning doing this particular thing, could you wake up and smile about it? And clearly, for me, this is something that makes me smile. And it is something that when you may have heard the expression, do what you love and the money will follow. I can honestly say that is the truth, because I love what I do, and I have had many wonderful opportunities professionally as a result of it. So that's where you have to look at it for yourself to find your own personal niche of what makes you smile.
Anyone else have any more questions?
Yvonne, I guess I would say, what are your final thoughts to our students as they're getting ready to venture into these careers? And then I guess for parents, what would be your top 1 or 2 pieces of advice to help their students, especially if they don't have a STEM background?
Oh boy, this is 2 great questions. Well, for students that are looking to pursue STEM, I think it's really important to have a concept of what pathway you would like to go down, and also look at multiple schools that might offer these pathways, because, for example, there may be one school, they have the same program, but maybe the campus environment may offer something else that you might be interested in, so you have an opportunity to marry both loves. I also said, you know, even though I love this institution, MIT and Harvard, being able to be flexible to expand your horizons to look at universities, other universities outside of the greater Boston area or the Ivy League schools, because I think you can get a really good quality education without having to spend a small fortune. And, you know, and I will share this with parents real quickly, a bit of a story I was sharing. I was one of those kids. I was accepted into an Ivy League school. Unfortunately, our financial situation in my family, I could not go to that school, even though they did give me some partial scholarship funding. I ultimately wound up going to a state university that provided a full scholarship, a 4-year scholarship, which included room and board as well. So I look back on that experience, and I remember at the time feeling very disappointed, but I also say in hindsight, I've had a pretty good life, and I'm not strapped to college loans, and it was largely because I had this scholarship. So that's the other thing too, is really looking critically at what you're doing for school, and are those opportunities for you afterwards. And I know parents think a lot about the cost. I know I did when my own child went off to school, but I also look at ways in which kids are very clear about certain career pathways that they're pursuing. For example, if you choose to pursue a career in engineering, have a good idea of what engineers do. Have a good idea of what kinds of projects that you can anticipate working on if you are a chemical engineer or structural engineer. And I think that is really critically important, because oftentimes, unfortunately, our students go off to college and they start down a path and realize that's not something I really want to do or I'm interested in. And I think the more opportunities parents can help guide them towards, if they're interested in a particular pathway, the better, whether it be to do a Google search and find companies that do a certain thing in terms of product, but seeing if they can have those experience or exposure to people that are doing that kind of work, because it will make a big difference in terms of your resources as parents, because the children are not changing majors every other year, but they are also very, very focused in their work. So I think in the interim, parents, be supportive, find those opportunities, your child can be exposed, because once again, I had no parents that were involved in STEM education. I had no relatives that were involved in STEM. However, I was always given opportunities to be exposed to interesting things that, you know, my parents did that often for me, even though they had no idea about the STEM fields or engineering. So I am very grateful to them for always providing those opportunities for me.
Great. If I get a few more questions.
Okay.
So one of them we got was, are there any international professional groups that you'd recommend participating in or considering joining?
Oh, yes. Actually, the association, you know, it depends on, like for example, engineering, which I know quite well. There is the Association of Society of Engineering, ASEE is an organization. There's also an International Technology and Engineering Association that has a collegiate association as well as those that are in the profession, which I think is very good. You know, and for example, for students of color, there is the National Society of Black Engineers. There's the Society of Hispanic SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Engineers. So these are culturally based organizations. And I also do believe, now I don't believe, I know for sure there is a, I've actually attended this conference before, and it is STEM Conference for Women of Color. And to be in a room with over 10,000 women of color that are involved in STEM, and these are, you know, Latino women, African American women, Asian women, Native American women, so all women of color. So that's the other thing too. There are those organizations that support, and also the good thing about some of these organizations is that they do sponsor student groups that come and participate for free or at very reduced cost, which I think is wonderful. But it's also an opportunity to get a mentor, to network with other people that are doing this work too. So those are a couple off the top of my head. And females, there's the Society of Women Engineers, and you know, and trust me, whether it be if you're interested in science or physics, there's still those organizations that focus specifically on that content. So, you know, I'm just talking about the ones on engineering, but there's always a tangential connection with some of the other ones as well.
And then we also have one more question about loans, and she asked, thinking about cost of college, how long do you think it should take to pay off loans? That's a hard one.
You know what? I tend to go the other way. I think you shouldn't have to pay off loans. You should be getting scholarships so you don't have to pay off loans. But, you know, the reality is and it is something that we have to be conscious of. And really looking at your family's budget too, because once again, I am a staunch believer that you can get a quality education and it doesn't have to cost a small fortune. And I also believe that it's important to look at where do you want to be? Do you want to walk out of the door several $100,000 in debt? Or could you choose to be at another location or another institution that may not yield that same kind of debt, and think about doing something different for a graduate program? Because I think there is a correlation to what you're going to earn versus what you have to pay out on a regular basis. And, you know, and I'm sure when you start to pay back loans, they only take out a certain percentage point. But you don't want to think about paying off a student loan for 20 years, you know, or 30 years, like, you know, and you have not even begun to walk out of the door. So there are some opportunities that I think could work very differently, whether it be a 2-year degree and then go on to transfer into a 4-year college, or where the cost of a community college degree may be a little less than moving on to a 4-year degree or a 4-year school initially. So those are some possible ways of getting around it, but I would encourage you, especially if you're in high school, to take as many classes as you can. Sometimes some schools offer what they call early college high school credit, where you get college credit for college while you're in high school. So those are some things I would investigate as well.
Can I add a few more something else there, Yvonne?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's changed for some schools, especially the top schools, is now they actually don't even do scholarships; they do financial aid.
Yes.
And so that's not all schools, but a lot of, and actually Harvard is the one that started the trend. So the other schools had to sort of follow suit. That you really are looking at that they're looking at the need of your family and the ability to pay for college, and so it could be that you might be able to go to a private school that has a large endowment, has a lot of money to give away for almost free, and it could be cheaper than some state schools. That's not always the case.
Right.
State schools still do scholarships, which is very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I would say look at what the options are, and and it's a little different. That I know, Yvonne, like when I was applying to college, it was all about scholarships. But now you won't get a scholarship to MIT, Harvard, Princeton, Yale. They only give financial aid.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more challenging if you don't, and some of them have like a lower amount. So if your family makes, for instance, like $50,000 or less, you're not probably going to pay anything. But in some cases, based on your financial aid application, you may have to pay something regardless of where school you go to.
Absolutely. And Shauna did bring up a really good point, is that particularly the Ivy League schools, is that the threshold of if your family makes under a certain amount of money and you happen to get in, you don't pay any tuition, and that is far cry from where I was when I went to college many years ago, because that didn't exist. So I applaud some of these schools, particularly the Ivies, for going in that direction, you know, because I'm sure I would have benefited if they would have had that program. So, you know, it's something to consider.
And I think the thing, too, is to know that the way financial aid works, let's say they determine that your family can pay $5,000 for college each year. That's all they can pay. Really, traditionally, that means wherever you get into school, whether it's a state school or a private school, they're going to try to meet your need until that $5,000. So that means if you get into MIT, then, and it costs $50,000, they're going to give you $45,000 of things. And MIT will not give you loans, you know, supposedly. So they will give you grants and scholarships until the $5,000. And the state school, like UMass Amherst, may also do the same thing, where they will give you whatever you need until the $5,000. So you're still going to have to pay that $5,000 unless you get a full scholarship or, you know, that kind of sponsorship for college. So for me going to college, it was actually cheaper to go to Howard University because they gave me tuition and fees than to actually go to UNC Chapel Hill, which I got into for undergrad too, but I got nothing. So just look at all the options. Don't assume that the state school, in some cases, might be cheaper than some private schools.
Absolutely. Good point.
Well, thank you, Yvonne, so much for your time. This is an amazing presentation. I loved all the graphs. I know it was very helpful and influential to our parents, and I know that those that may not have been able to make it, we do record these, so I know they'll look forward to seeing all the information that you shared with us tonight.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is Linda. I just want to thank you, Dr. Spicer, because I think one of the things that you've allowed the parents to do is to start the dialogue with their students and their families to talk about all the opportunities in education and careers, about the financial planning piece, and I think that's been a really valuable resource to show our parents how they can start that conversation and support their children through their interest in STEM. I want to thank all of you again for being part of our webinar, and let you know that we're planning another webinar in May or June, and we wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to have your students transition into college. And for some of our our parents with younger children, talk a little bit about transitioning their students into high school. But again, thank you so much. We have a survey to fill out that we'll send you right away, and thank you again to Dr. Spicer.